August 7, 1944. 06:17 hours. Normandy, France. Oberlieutenant Heinrich Kruger had killed 17 American tanks in 62 days. 17 perfect shots, 17 fireballs, 17 crews who never saw it coming. His Panzer IV sat hidden along a sunken road near St. Lo, waiting for number 18. The Americans called their Shermans Ronsons after the cigarette lighter. One flick and they lit up. Kruger's crew had a darker name. Tommy Cookers. Because that's what happened to the men inside. Movement. 11 o'clock. A Sherman emerged through morning fog. Kruger's pulse didn't even quicken. This was routine now. His gunner Ernst Wagner announced the range. 800 meters. Kruger gave the order. Fire. The Panzer IV rocked backward. Kruger watched through his periscope as the shell struck the Sherman's frontal plate, dead center. Perfect hit. He waited for the familiar orange bloom, the black smoke, the desperate figures tumbling from hatches. Nothing happened. The Sherman kept rolling forward like nothing had touched it. Wagner's voice cracked. First time in 11 months of combat. What in God's name? Kruger screamed for a reload. Second shot. Another direct hit on the glacis plate. Sparks flew. Steel rang against steel. The Sherman didn't stop. Didn't slow. Its turret was already turning toward them. In that moment, Heinrich Kruger understood something terrible. The rules had changed, and nobody had told him. Here's what the history books don't emphasize enough. Between D-Day and the end of July 1944, American forces lost over 400 Sherman tanks in Normandy alone. That's 7 tanks destroyed every single day for 8 straight weeks. German gunners had become so confident they held competitions. Who could brew up the most Shermans before lunch? Who could hit a moving target at maximum range? Some crews painted kill marks on their barrels like fighter aces. The Sherman was reliable, easy to build. America was cranking out nearly 2,000 per month. But there was one problem nobody in Washington wanted to discuss publicly. The Sherman was a death trap. Its armor couldn't stop German 75mm guns beyond 500 meters. Against the 88mm mounted on Tigers and Panthers, a Sherman was vulnerable at nearly 2 kilometers. Worse, the Sherman ran on gasoline. When shells penetrated, tanks didn't just burn. They exploded. Ammunition cooked off. Fuel ignited. Crews had seconds to escape before the interior became an inferno. American tankers developed a saying that never made it into official reports. 5 Shermans to kill 1 Panther, and 4 of us won't make it home. The casualty rates were catastrophic. Some units reported 100% tank losses within their first month in combat. Not casualties. Tanks. Entire companies wiped out and rebuilt 3 times over. Replacement crews arrived with barely 20 hours of training. They inherited vehicles still stained with blood from previous occupants. One sergeant wrote to his brother, "They're feeding us into a machine. We climb in knowing we probably won't climb out. Pray for me." But in the first 3 weeks of August, something shifted. German tank losses suddenly increased by 37%. American losses dropped. Panzer commanders who had spent months destroying Shermans with impunity started filing bizarre reports. Shells bouncing off American tanks. Direct hits failing to penetrate. Shermans absorbing punishment that should have killed them instantly. What changed? The answer traces back to a factory floor in Detroit and a man whose name appears in no history textbooks. Robert Zielinski was 43 years old in the spring of 1944, son of Polish immigrants. Started working Pittsburgh steel mills at 16. Never finished high school. Never attended university. Learned metallurgy the hard way through burns and 12-hour shifts and watching what happened when you got the carbon ratio wrong. By 1942, Zielinski was senior metallurgist at Detroit Tank Arsenal. The Army considered him useful but unremarkable. Good with numbers. Better with his hands. Knew steel the way a musician knows an instrument. In February 1944, Zielinski received samples from destroyed Shermans, shipped back from North Africa. The Army wanted analysis. Why were the tanks failing so catastrophically? What Zelensky found made him sick. The problem wasn't just thin armor. The problem was the steel itself. American armor plate was hard but brittle. When German shells struck the metal, didn't deform and absorb energy. It shattered. Fragments called spall sprayed through tank interiors like shrapnel grenades. Crews died even when shells didn't fully penetrate. Zelensky started sketching at night. Not just thicker armor, better armor. Steel that would flex instead of fracture. Plates angled to deflect rather than absorb. A Sherman that could take hits German tanks couldn't deliver. He presented his concepts to the engineering board in March 1944. They laughed at him. "You want to add 6 tons to a Sherman?" Colonel Harrison barely contained his contempt. "The suspension will collapse, the engine will overheat, the transmission will grind itself apart within 50 miles. A slow tank that survives beats a fast tank that burns," Zelensky replied. "And how exactly do we transport these monsters to Europe? They won't fit on standard shipping." "We figure it out, or we keep sending boys to die in tin cans." The room went quiet. Zelensky had crossed a line. You didn't talk to colonels that way, especially colonels who had never smelled a burning tank. Harrison's response was cold. "You have 6 weeks. Prove your concept or pack for Alaska." 6 weeks. To redesign an entire tank. To solve problems that automotive engineers had called impossible. To save lives that the Army had already written off as acceptable losses. Zelensky didn't go home that night, or the next. He slept on a cot in his office, working calculations until his eyes blurred. His wife brought him meals he barely touched. His children forgot what their father looked like. He assembled a team of 12 workers, all volunteers, all fathers, brothers, husbands who understood what failure meant for the men overseas. They worked 18-hour shifts. They scrounged materials allocated to other projects. They broke regulations they didn't have time to read. The design that emerged broke every rule in the Army's armored vehicle doctrine. Frontal armor doubled from 51 mm to 102 mm. Turret face thickened to resist 80 mm fire at combat ranges. Hull glacis angled at 47 degrees to maximize shell deflection. Additional armor welded over ammunition storage transmission housing driver's compartment. Total weight 42 tons, nearly 8 tons heavier than a standard Sherman. Critics called it a disaster waiting to happen. The Ford GAA engine was already stressed in normal Shermans. Adding that much weight would destroy it. Suspension components would fail. Tracks would throw under combat maneuvering. But Zelensky understood something the critics didn't. He had built the armor to flex. Each plate was heat-treated to precise specifications that maximized toughness over hardness. When shells struck, energy would dissipate through controlled deformation rather than catastrophic fracture. April 19, 1944. The first prototype rolled off the assembly line. Workers had started calling it the Jumbo because of its massive bulk. Zelensky thought the name was undignified. But it stuck anyway. He insisted on driving the first test himself. If the suspension collapsed or the transmission failed, he wanted to be the one inside, not some 20-year-old test driver with a family waiting. The Jumbo lurched forward, engine straining, transmission grinding. Every noise made Zelensky's heart stop. 5 miles, 10 miles, 20 miles. The tank held together. Then came the real test. Zelensky drove the Jumbo to a firing range where captured German anti-tank guns waited. A 75mm PaK-40, the same weapon that had killed thousands of American tankers. He positioned the tank 500 meters from the gun, climbed out, walked to the gunner crew. "Hit the front plate, center mass, don't hold back." The gunner hesitated. "Sir, you want us to fire at our own tank? I want you to try to kill it. Give me everything." First round, direct hit. The Jumbo rocked backward. Zelensky heard the impact from 50 meters away. Metal screaming against metal. No penetration. Second round, Same spot. The plate deformed but held. Third, fourth, fifth, sixth. 6 direct hits from a weapon that had destroyed hundreds of Shermans. Not one penetration, not one instance of spalling. The crew inside would have survived every shot. Zelensky walked to the Jumbo and ran his hands across the impacts. Dents, gouges, scars in the steel. But the armor held. Word spread through Detroit tank arsenal within hours. Workers came to see the battered prototype. They touched the impact marks like pilgrims touching relics. Some wept openly. One foreman, a 50-year-old veteran of the First War, said it simply, "This is going to bring our boys home." The Army rushed the Jumbo into emergency production. No time for extended trials. No time for bureaucratic approval chains. American tankers were dying now. Fisher Tank Arsenal in Grand Blanc, Michigan, retooled overnight. Workers volunteered for double shifts. They skipped breaks. They pushed themselves until they collapsed, then got up and kept working. Between May and July 1944, exactly 254 M4A3E2 Jumbo Shermans rolled off the production line. Not enough to replace every Sherman in Europe. Not even enough to equip every armored division. But enough to change everything. The first Jumbos reached Normandy in late July, just as Operation Cobra launched the massive American breakout. They were distributed carefully, 1 or 2 per company, assigned to lead every major assault. German tank crews noticed immediately. Near Mortain, a Panzer IV commander fired 3 perfect shots at what looked like a standard Sherman. All 3 bounced. Before he could reload a 4th time, the Sherman's return fire punched through his own armor. At Argenton, a Panther engaged an American tank at 600 meters, point-blank range for the 75mm gun. The shell struck true and deflected into the sky. Reports flooded German headquarters. American tanks that couldn't be killed. Shermans that absorbed hits from 75mm guns without slowing. Vehicles that shrugged off Panzerfaust rockets to the front plate. Hauptmann Friedrich Weber, a staff officer with 5th Panzer Army, compiled the reports with growing horror. In 11 days, his analysis showed German tank losses had increased 40% against American armor. The Americans hadn't changed tactics. They hadn't gained more tanks. They had simply stopped dying. The psychological impact was devastating. For months, German tankers had operated with absolute confidence. They knew their weapons outclassed American armor. They knew every engagement favored them. This confidence let them fight aggressively, hold impossible positions, accept unfavorable odds. The Jumbo shattered that confidence in days. Suddenly every Sherman might be a Jumbo. Every target might be unkillable. German gunners hesitated, uncertain whether to fire or reposition. They second-guessed shot placements that had worked perfectly for months. And in armored combat, hesitation is death. But here's what Zelensky never anticipated. The Germans weren't going to accept defeat quietly. They were going to adapt. Within 2 weeks, German commanders identified the Jumbo's weaknesses. Side armor, rear armor, the engine compartment, the narrow gap between turret and hull. They developed new doctrine. Let the Jumbos pass. Hit them from the flanks. Concentrate multiple guns on single targets. Use terrain to force close-range engagements where Panzerfaust rockets could find vulnerable angles. And they started targeting Jumbos specifically, because killing the assault tank meant breaking the American attack. In Part 2, we'll see how German forces adapted to the Jumbo threat. We'll witness the Battle of Mortain, where the Wehrmacht's desperate counterattack met American armor head-on. We'll follow Staff Sergeant Thomas McMillan as his Jumbo Thunderbolt faces 5 German tanks in 17 minutes. And we'll learn the terrible truth that Robert Zelensky always knew but never spoke aloud. Even the Jumbo could die. And the Germans were learning exactly how to kill it. In Part 1, Robert Zelensky built the impossible. A Sherman tank that German guns couldn't kill. The M4A3E2 Jumbo changed everything in Normandy. American losses dropped. German confidence shattered. For the first time since D-Day, Panzer crews felt fear. But we ended with a warning. The Germans weren't going to accept defeat. They were learning, adapting, finding weaknesses. Here's a number that should terrify you. In the last week of August 1944, German forces destroyed 14 jumbos. 14 tanks that were supposed to be invincible. 14 crews who thought their armor would protect them. The Germans had figured it out. And now American tankers were dying in machines they trusted completely. This is where everything got worse. August 12, 1944. 5th Panzer Army Headquarters, Argenton, France. Hauptmann Friedrich Weber hadn't slept in 3 days. The intelligence reports on his desk painted a picture of catastrophe. German armor losses had increased 40% since the American assault tanks appeared. Panzer crews were refusing to engage. Some units had broken entirely. But Weber saw something in the data that others missed. Not every jumbo survived. Some burned just like regular Shermans. The question was why. He spread photographs across the table. Destroyed American assault tanks. Entry wounds circled in red ink. Impact angles measured to the degree. The pattern emerged slowly. Frontal hits bounced. Turret face hits deflected. But side armor, rear armor, the gap between turret and hull, these killed jumbos just fine. Weber called for his aide. "Get me Oberstleutnant von Brandt, immediately." Hans-Joachim von Brandt arrived within the hour. Prussian aristocrat. Tank commander since Poland. One of the few officers Weber trusted to understand what he was seeing. "The American assault tanks have a weakness," Weber said without preamble. "Several, actually." Von Brandt studied the photographs. His expression shifted from skepticism to interest to something like hope. "The side armor is standard Sherman thickness. 50 millimeters at best." "Correct, and look here." Weber pointed to a destroyed jumbo's engine compartment. "Panzerfaust penetrated cleanly. The additional frontal armor doesn't extend to the rear, so we let them pass, hit them from the flanks. More than that, we identify them, target them specifically, kill the assault tank first, and the American attack loses its spearhead." Von Brandt was quiet for a moment. "This requires entirely new doctrine, training, coordination between units." "Then we start immediately. How many operational tanks do you have?" 37. Mixed Panthers and Panzer IVs. "I want your best crews briefed by tonight. We're going to teach the Americans that their miracle tank can still die." This was the German military's greatest strength. Not their tanks, not their guns. Their ability to adapt under pressure, to analyze failure and develop countermeasures faster than any army in history. Within 72 hours, new tactical guidelines reached every panzer unit on the Western Front. The document was titled simply, "Engaging American Assault Tanks." Let them close to under 400 meters. Target side armor below the turret ring. Concentrate multiple guns on single vehicles. Use infantry with Panzerfausts to attack from concealment after the tank passes. Never engage frontally unless using 88mm guns at close range. The Americans had no idea what was coming. But here's the thing about war. Intelligence flows both ways. And the Americans had their own people watching. Captain Edward "Eddie" Morrison wasn't supposed to be in France. His official assignment was technical liaison to Army ground forces in Washington. Paperwork, meetings. The slow death of a career officer who had made too many enemies. Morrison had helped Zelensky push the jumbo through production. He'd seen the test results. He knew what this tank could do. And when reports started coming back about destroyed jumbos, he pulled every string he had to get to Normandy. What he found horrified him. Crews were using jumbos wrong. Completely wrong. They treated the assault tanks like they were invincible. Drove straight at German positions. Ignored flank security. Assumed the armor would handle everything. The armor couldn't handle everything. Not when German doctrine specifically targeted their weaknesses. August 18th, 1944. Morrison stood in a muddy field outside Argentan, looking at 3 burned-out jumbos. All destroyed within the past 48 hours. All killed by side or rear shots. "They're adapting faster than we expected," Morrison said to Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison, commander of the 66th Armored Regiment. Harrison's jaw tightened. "We're losing more jumbos now than we did in the first 2 weeks combined. Command is asking questions." Command should be asking why we're using assault tanks like they're regular Shermans. The jumbo was designed to lead breakthrough attacks, not operate independently. Tell that to General Patton. He wants speed, aggression. These tanks are too slow for his kind of war. Morrison felt his temper rise. These tanks are keeping crews alive. That should matter more than speed. "Captain, I've been fighting armor since North Africa. Don't lecture me on what matters." The 2 men stared at each other. Different ranks, different philosophies, same problem. Finally, Harrison exhaled. "What do you need?" "1 week. Let me work with your crews. New tactics specifically for jumbos. How to use the armor advantage without exposing weaknesses. And if it doesn't work, then we've lost a week. But if it works, we stop losing tanks we can't replace." Harrison considered. The jumbo production line had already shut down. Only 254 were ever built. Everyone destroyed was irreplaceable. "1 week, Captain. Prove it works or get out of my regiment." Morrison didn't waste time. He gathered every jumbo commander in the regiment. 17 men who had survived combat that killed others. Men who understood their tanks but didn't fully grasp how the enemy had changed. "Forget everything you think you know about armor protection," Morrison began. "The Germans have figured out how to kill you. From now on, we fight differently." He outlined new doctrine. Jumbos would advance with standard Shermans mixed in, making identification harder. Infantry would screen flanks constantly. No jumbo would operate more than 200 meters ahead of supporting elements. Side armor would be angled toward known enemy positions whenever possible. "You're asking us to slow down," one sergeant complained. "The whole point of the jumbo is leading the charge." "The whole point of the jumbo is surviving the charge. A dead assault tank doesn't lead anything." Staff Sergeant Thomas McMillan listened without speaking. His jumbo Thunderbolt had taken 11 hits in 3 weeks, all frontal, all deflected. He understood what Morrison was saying. "The captain's right," McMillan said quietly. The room turned to him. "I watched Baker Company lose 2 jumbos yesterday. Both hit from the side while pushing too far ahead. The Germans waited for them to pass, then put Panzerfausts into their flanks. Good crews. Dead because they trusted armor that wasn't there." Morrison nodded. "Sergeant McMillan will demonstrate the new tactics tomorrow. Euro 600. Full combat load. We're going to show you how to stay alive." Dawn broke gray and cold over the training ground. Morrison had arranged German equipment captured in the Falaise pocket. 3 Panzerfaust launchers. 1 75mm PaK-40 anti-tank gun. Wooden targets representing tank silhouettes. 17 jumbo commanders stood watching as Thunderbolt rolled onto the field. McMillan's crew had spent the night reviewing Morrison's doctrine. They were about to prove it worked. "Standard approach first," Morrison announced through a megaphone. "Sergeant McMillan will advance directly toward the anti-tank position. Watch what happens." Thunderbolt lurched forward. Straight line. Maximum speed. Exactly how most jumbo crews had been fighting. Morrison's assistants fired smoke charges, simulating German anti-tank fire. 3 hits on Thunderbolt's frontal armor. All would have bounced on a real jumbo. "Frontal protection holds," Morrison narrated. "But watch the flanks." As Thunderbolt passed the anti-tank gun position, 2 assistants emerged from concealment 50 meters to the right. They raised Panzerfausts, aimed at Thunderbolt's side armor. "Dead!" Morrison shouted. "The crew just died. German infantry let the assault tank pass, then destroyed it from a position the armor doesn't cover." The jumbo commanders shifted uncomfortably. Several had survived exactly this situation through pure luck. "Now watch the new doctrine." Thunderbolt withdrew to starting position. This time, 4 infantrymen accompanied the tank, 2 on each side, slightly behind, scanning for threats. Macmillan advanced again. Same anti-tank position, same simulated frontal hits bouncing off. But when the assistants emerged with Panzerfausts, the American infantrymen spotted them instantly. Rifle fire drove them back. Thunderbolt's coaxial machine gun suppressed the position. The tank continued advancing, flanks protected. "Same tank, same armor, same enemy weapons," Morrison said. "Different outcome because we used combined arms doctrine. The Jumbo leads, infantry protects. Nobody operates alone." He called Macmillan out of the tank. "Sergeant, explain your approach." Macmillan addressed his fellow commanders directly. "The Germans want us to trust our armor completely. Push too far ahead. Expose our sides and rear. The moment we do that, we're dead. The Jumbo is incredible from the front. But from the side, we're just another Sherman. Remember that." Morrison ran the demonstration 6 more times. Different scenarios, different threat positions. Each time, the combination of Jumbo armor and infantry support succeeded where the tank alone would have died. By noon, the commanders understood. This wasn't about slowing down or being cautious. This was about using every advantage correctly instead of relying on just one. "Questions?" Morrison asked. A lieutenant from Charlie Company raised his hand. "Sir, what about when we don't have infantry support exploitation operations? Pursuit. Patton wants us moving fast." "Then you don't lead with Jumbos. Save them for breakthrough operations where infantry can keep pace. Use standard Shermans for pursuit. It's not complicated. It's just discipline." The lieutenant nodded slowly. It made sense. It just required thinking differently. "One more thing," Morrison added. "The Germans are specifically targeting Jumbos now. They've identified the visual differences, the thicker mantlet, the wider tracks. If you're leading an attack, assume every German gun is aimed at you personally, because it probably is." The new doctrine spread through the regiment within days. Jumbo losses dropped immediately. In the first week of September, only 2 assault tanks were destroyed, down from 14 the week before. But the real test came at Mortain. September 7, 1944. German forces launched a massive counterattack aimed at cutting off American units that had broken through at Avranches. 15 Panzer divisions struck at dawn. The largest German armored operation since Normandy began. Macmillan's Thunderbolt was positioned at a crossroads the Germans needed to capture. His orders were simple: hold until relieved or destroyed. The first wave hit at 0630. 4 Panzer IVs advancing through morning fog. Macmillan's gunner Corporal Rodriguez called targets with mechanical precision. "Panzer IV, 800 meters, 11 o'clock. Identified, fire!" Thunderbolt's 76mm gun roared. The lead German tank exploded. Before the smoke cleared, Rodriguez was calling the next target. "Panzer IV, 700 meters, 1 o'clock. Fire." Second kill. The remaining 2 Germans tried to flank. Infantry positioned exactly as Morrison had taught spotted them immediately. "Movement right, Panzers trying to get around us." Macmillan traversed the turret, caught the 3rd Panzer IV as it emerged from behind a hedgerow. The German crew never saw the shot that killed them. The 4th Panzer retreated, first wave broken. But the Germans weren't finished. The second wave brought Panthers. Bigger guns, better armor, more dangerous in every way. Macmillan counted 6 Panthers advancing in echelon formation. Professional movement, veteran crews. These weren't desperate conscripts. These were soldiers who knew exactly how to kill a Jumbo. "All positions hold fire until 400 meters, Macmillan ordered through the radio. "Let them commit." The Panthers closed. 600 meters, 500 meters. Their guns began firing. Shells slammed into Thunderbolt's frontal armor. Each impact rang through the tank like a church bell. The crew braced against metal that held against weapons designed to kill them. 400 meters. Fire. Every American weapon opened simultaneously. Thunderbolt's main gun. machine guns from infantry positions, mortars dropping rounds behind the German formation. Coordinated, disciplined. Exactly what Morrison had taught. In 90 seconds, 3 Panthers were burning. 2 more retreated with damaged tracks. The 6th took a shot through its side armor as it tried to reposition. 6 Panthers destroyed or disabled. 0 American losses. The crossroads held. That evening, Morrison found McMillan sitting on Thunderbolt's turret, smoking a cigarette with shaking hands. The Jumbo's frontal armor showed 17 new impact scars. "Doctrine works," McMillan said simply. Morrison looked at the battered tank. The armor that should have failed a dozen times but held because the crew understood how to use it. "I'll make sure Washington hears about today." "Don't care about Washington. Care about my crew going home." By mid-September, the new Jumbo doctrine had spread beyond the 66th Armored Regiment. Other units adopted Morrison's tactics. Losses dropped across the theater. German commanders reported with frustration that their anti-Jumbo measures were becoming less effective. The Wehrmacht had adapted first. Now the Americans had adapted to the adaptation. But here's what nobody anticipated. German intelligence didn't just analyze the Jumbo's armor. They analyzed its deployment patterns, where it appeared, how it was used, what it meant for American offensive planning, and they shared everything with Berlin. September 22, 1944. A German reconnaissance report reached Hitler's headquarters. It detailed American assault tank tactics, crew training methods, and most importantly, production limitations. The Americans had built only 254 Jumbos. The production line was closed. Every assault tank destroyed was irreplaceable. Hitler saw opportunity. "Concentrate on destroying these assault tanks," he ordered. "Every one we kill weakens their breakthrough capability permanently. This is a battle of attrition we can win." New orders went to every German unit on the Western Front. Jumbos became priority targets above all others. Bounties were offered for confirmed kills. Special anti-tank teams received training specifically for engaging the American assault tanks. And something else was happening. Something the Americans wouldn't discover until it was almost too late. German engineers had been studying captured Jumbo armor samples, analyzing the steel composition, testing penetration methods. They were developing a new weapon, something designed specifically to kill the unkillable tank. In Part 3, we'll see the German response reach its peak. We'll follow a special anti-tank unit hunting Jumbos across France. We'll witness the development of upgraded ammunition that could penetrate the assault tank's frontal armor. And we'll watch Robert Zelensky receive news that will force him to make an impossible choice. His tank was dying. The question was whether he could save it before the Germans found the solution they were looking for. The real war for the Jumbo was just beginning. Let's recap where we are. Robert Zelensky built a tank that couldn't be killed. The M4A3E2 Jumbo changed everything in Normandy. German confidence shattered. American losses dropped. Then the Germans adapted. New tactics, flank attacks, Panzerfaust ambushes. Captain Morrison developed counter-doctrine, combined arms, infantry support, discipline over aggression. Jumbo losses dropped again. But we ended Part 2 with a warning. Hitler himself ordered the destruction of every Jumbo in Europe. Bounties were placed on assault tank kills. Special hunter teams received training, and German engineers were studying captured armor samples, developing something new. Here's a number that changed everything. October 1944. German anti-tank units reported a 340% increase in Jumbo engagements. Not because there were more Jumbos, because the Wehrmacht was hunting them specifically. The Americans had built the perfect breakthrough weapon. Now they were about to learn what happens when the enemy makes destroying that weapon their absolute priority. This was no longer an experiment. This was war. October 3, 1944, Berlin, Reich Main Security Office. Brigadeführer Wilhelm Schaefer reviewed intelligence reports with growing satisfaction. 6 weeks of systematic analysis had produced results. The American assault tanks were formidable but limited. Only 254 built. Production line closed. Every jumbo destroyed was irreplaceable. More importantly, Schaefer's analysts had identified patterns. Jumbos appeared at breakthrough points. They led major assaults, where jumbos concentrated American offensives followed within days. "We can predict their attacks," Schaefer told his staff. "The assault tanks are beacons. Find the jumbos, find the offensive." He issued new orders. Special reconnaissance units would track jumbo movements across the Western Front. Anti-tank teams would position ahead of expected assault routes. Artillery would pre-register on likely jumbo approach corridors. The hunters had become the hunted. On the ground, German tactics evolved rapidly. Panzerjäger units received upgraded equipment. New tungsten core ammunition, designated Panzergranit 40, could penetrate thicker armor at combat ranges. Supplies were limited, but every round went to crews specifically targeting assault tanks. More dangerous were the Jagd Panther tank destroyers, mounting the same 88mm gun as the Tiger, but on a lower, harder-to-hit chassis. Jagd Panthers could penetrate jumbo frontal armor at 1,500 meters. German commanders positioned them specifically along routes where American assault tanks would advance. The kill ratio shifted. In the first 2 weeks of October, German forces destroyed 11 jumbos, 7 from frontal hits. The upgraded ammunition was working. American tankers noticed immediately. Armor that had stopped everything now showed penetrations. Crews who had trusted their protection completely started dying in machines they thought were invincible. Staff Sergeant Macmillan saw it firsthand. His friend Sergeant Patterson took a frontal hit near Aachen. The shell punched clean through armor that should have stopped it. Patterson and 3 crew members burned to death. The 4th died trying to escape. "Something's changed," Macmillan told Morrison that evening. "That hit should have bounced. It didn't." Morrison requisitioned the destroyed jumbo for analysis. What he found confirmed his fears. The penetration hole showed characteristics of tungsten core ammunition, harder, denser, designed specifically to defeat heavy armor. The Germans had developed a jumbo killer. But this wasn't the only problem facing the assault tank program. Back in Detroit, Robert Zielinski received reports that made him physically ill. 3 jumbos had suffered catastrophic transmission failures in combat, all within the same week, all from the same production batch. The investigation revealed a nightmare scenario. Under pressure to meet production quotas, quality control had slipped. Heat treatment specifications weren't followed precisely. Armor remained excellent, but drivetrain components were failing at 3 times the expected rate. One failure occurred during a German counterattack. The jumbo's transmission seized while under fire. The crew couldn't retreat, couldn't maneuver. They died in a tank that was supposed to protect them. Zielinski demanded answers. What he got was bureaucratic deflection. Production managers blamed unrealistic schedules. Inspectors blamed inadequate staffing. Everyone blamed someone else. "We killed those men," Zielinski said at an emergency meeting. "Not the Germans. Us, our shortcuts, our failures." Colonel Harrison, still overseeing the program, disagreed publicly. "Combat produces failures. Equipment breaks. This isn't a crisis. It's war. 3 identical failures from the same batch isn't combat. It's negligence." Harrison's expression hardened. "Careful, Mr. Zielinski. You're not irreplaceable." But Zielinski refused to back down. He drafted a report documenting the failures and sent copies to Army Ground Forces headquarters. He demanded an independent investigation. He put his career on the line for crews he would never meet. The response came swiftly. Zielinski was removed from the jumbo program, reassigned to consulting duties that amounted to exile. His report was buried. For 3 weeks, Robert Zielinski sat in a Detroit office doing nothing while American tankers died in machines bearing his name. Then came Aachen. October 21, 1944. The Battle of Aachen had raged for 2 weeks. the first German city to face American assault. Hitler ordered it held to the last man. Every building was a fortress. Every street was a kill zone. American forces had surrounded the city but couldn't break through. The assault required tanks. Specifically tanks that could survive the concentrated anti-tank fire defending every major intersection. Jumbos. 8 M4A3E2 assault tanks from the 3rd Armored Division received orders to lead the final push into central Aachen. Their mission was straightforward on paper. Advance down Wilhelmstrasse. Neutralize anti-tank positions. Create a corridor for infantry to reach the city center. Staff Sergeant Harold Hank Donovan commanded the lead Jumbo, a tank his crew had named Fury Road, after a John Steinbeck novel nobody had actually read. 0530 hours. October 21st. Fog hung over ruined streets. Donovan's tank idled at the assault line engine, rumbling crew silent. The radio crackled. All Jumbo elements execute. Godspeed. Fury Road lurched forward. 7 assault tanks followed in column. Infantry hugged the walls behind them. Somewhere ahead, German guns waited. The first shot came at 0547. A 75mm round from a concealed Pak-40 struck Fury Road's glacis plate. The impact rang through the tank like a hammer on an anvil. The shell deflected. Donovan's crew didn't flinch. Gunner target, 11 o'clock, ground floor window. Identified. Fire. Fury Road's 76mm gun roared. The building facade collapsed. The German gun crew died in the rubble. First threat neutralized. Advance continued. Second shot. Third. Fourth. Each impact tested armor that held, because Robert Zielinski had built it to hold. 0612 hours. Wilhelmstrasse opened into a small plaza. Donovan's instincts screamed warning. Too quiet. Too exposed. All tanks hold position. Something's wrong. Then the ambush sprung. 3 Jagd Panthers emerged from concealed positions. North side of the plaza. South side. Dead center. Overlapping fields of fire. Perfect kill box. The German 88s opened simultaneously. 3 shells converged on Fury Road. First shell hit the turret face. Penetrated. Donovan felt metal fragments tear through his left arm. His loader screamed. Blood everywhere. Second shell struck the hull front. This one deflected. The angle saved them. Third shell missed by inches. Fury Road was still alive. Barely. Return fire. All tanks engage. The plaza became chaos. 8 Jumbos versus 3 Jagd Panthers. American 76mm guns against German 88s. Armor against armor. Skill against skill. Donovan fought one-handed. Blood soaking his uniform. Vision blurring. He called targets. His gunner fired. His driver maneuvered. They worked as one organism because that's what survival demanded. The second Jumbo in column took a catastrophic hit. Ammunition detonated. The tank disappeared in a fireball that rose 3 stories high. Keep firing, don't stop. Fury Road's gunner found his mark. 1 Jagd Panther took a 76mm round through the lower hull. The German tank destroyer shuddered. Smoke poured from hatches. Crew bailed out. Another Jumbo scored a flank shot on the second Jagd Panther. The German vehicle slewed sideways, dead in its tracks. The third Jagd Panther began reversing, retreating. Its commander recognized defeat. Don't let him go. 3 Jumbos fired simultaneously. 2 shells struck. The Jagd Panther exploded. 0634 hours. 22 minutes since the assault began. The plaza was secured. Cost 2 Jumbos destroyed. 14 Americans dead. Donovan wounded seriously but alive. Result 3. Jagd Panthers eliminated. German defensive line broken. Path to city center open. Donovan refused evacuation until infantry secured the plaza. He sat in Fury Road's turret arm wrapped in bloody bandages, watching American soldiers pour through the gap his tanks had created. "Sergeant, you need medical attention now," a medic insisted. "In a minute. Want to see this? What he saw was infantry capturing the final German strongpoint in central Aachen, white flags appearing in windows, Wehrmacht soldiers emerging with hands raised. The first German city falling to American forces. The Jumbos had made it possible. 8 tanks. 22 minutes. A city conquered. News of Aachen spread through the American military within hours. General Omar Bradley personally commended the assault tank crews. Stars and stripes ran the story on the front page. Super Shermans crack Nazi fortress. The narrative was irresistible. American innovation defeating German fortifications. David versus Goliath. Except David was a 42-ton steel monster that German guns couldn't kill. Morale surged across the Western Front. Tank crews who had feared German armor now requested jumbo assignments. Infantry units specifically requested assault tank support. The jumbo became a symbol of American technological superiority. The Germans noticed too. After Aachen, Wehrmacht defensive doctrine changed completely. Anti-tank guns were positioned deeper, forcing longer engagements where even upgraded ammunition lost effectiveness. Minefields were expanded. Artillery concentrations increased. If they couldn't kill jumbos directly, they would make advancing impossible. But the psychological damage was done. German tankers, who had once hunted Shermans, confidently now reported assault tank fear affecting combat performance. Crews hesitated when engaging jumbos, uncertain whether their weapons would work. That hesitation cost lives. The numbers told the story. In September 1944, American armored divisions suffered 23% casualties during breakthrough operations. In November, after Aachen, that number dropped to 14%. The jumbo hadn't just changed tactics, it had changed mathematics. More importantly, the assault tank had changed how American commanders thought about armored warfare. The old doctrine of speed over armor gave way to survive first, advance second. Crews that stayed alive learned. Crews that learned won. By December 1944, every armored division on the Western Front had integrated jumbo doctrine into their operations. Combined arms tactics became standard. The lessons written in blood at Normandy had become official policy. Robert Zelensky heard about Aachen from his exile office in Detroit. The same report that described the victory also mentioned the 2 destroyed jumbos. 8 men dead. 8 families who would receive telegrams. He thought about the transmission failures, the quality control problems, the shortcuts that killed American tankers. He thought about the crews at Aachen who survived because his armor worked exactly as designed. Both things were true. The jumbo saved lives and cost lives. Protection and failure. Pride and guilt. Zelensky would carry both for the rest of his days. The Battle of Aachen proved the jumbo's value beyond any doubt. The assault tank had transformed from experimental concept to essential weapon. From impossible design to war-winning technology. But here's what the victory reports didn't mention. The 254 jumbos produced in 1944 were all that would ever exist. No more were coming. Every tank destroyed was gone forever. And December 1944 was approaching. The Ardennes. The Battle of the Bulge. The largest German offensive since Normandy. Hitler was gambling everything on one last attack, and he knew exactly where the American assault tanks were positioned. In Part 4, we'll see the jumbo face its ultimate test. We'll follow the assault tanks through the frozen forests of Belgium as German forces struck with overwhelming force. We'll learn what happened to Robert Zelensky after the war, and we'll discover the truth about the jumbo's legacy, a truth that military historians debated for decades. The battle that forged the legend was over, but the story of the man who built it, that chapter was just beginning. Let's trace the journey one final time. A factory worker from Pittsburgh named Robert Zelensky looked at American tanks burning in North Africa and refused to accept that soldiers had to die in machines that couldn't protect them. He designed armor that military engineers called impossible. He built a prototype in 6 weeks that should have taken 6 months. He proved that a Sherman could survive German guns. And then, 254 M4A3E2 jumbos rolled into Normandy and changed the mathematics of armored warfare forever. We've seen the battles. Normandy, Mortain, Aachen. We've watched German confidence shatter and American tankers survive hits that should have killed them. We've followed the adaptation and counter-adaptation that defined modern armored combat. But we ended Part 3 with a question. What happened to the man who started it all? The answer contains a twist that nobody expected, because Robert Zelensky's story didn't end with victory parades and medals. It ended somewhere far more complicated. Success, it turns out, comes with a price that history rarely mentions. December 16, 1944. The Ardennes Forest. Germany launched its final major offensive of the war. 3 German armies struck through the frozen forests of Belgium with overwhelming force. The Battle of the Bulge had begun. Robert Zelensky wasn't in Belgium. He was still in Detroit, still exiled to his consulting office, still waiting for someone to acknowledge that his quality control warnings had been right. The transmission failures he documented had killed 11 more tankers since his removal from the program. Nobody apologized. Nobody reinstated him. The army needed jumbos, not the man who built them. But Zelensky followed the battle through radio reports and newspaper headlines. He knew exactly where the assault tanks were positioned. He knew they would bear the brunt of the German attack. And he knew that every jumbo destroyed was one that would never be replaced. The Bulge consumed jumbos at a terrifying rate. In the first week alone, German forces destroyed or captured 19 assault tanks. The concentrated panzer assault overwhelmed defensive positions before reinforcements could arrive. Crews who had survived Normandy died in frozen forests they never expected to fight in. Sergeant Macmillan's Thunderbolt was among the losses. Not to enemy fire, but to a transmission failure during a fighting retreat near Bastogne. The tank seized up on an icy road. Macmillan ordered his crew to abandon and escape on foot. They survived. Thunderbolt did not. Macmillan found Zelensky's address through Army records. In January 1945, he wrote a letter that would haunt both men for decades. Mr. Zelensky, you saved my life at least 6 times. Your armor stopped shells that should have killed my crew. But my tank died because something else broke. I heard you tried to fix it. I heard they wouldn't listen. I want you to know that I listened. The men who survived in jumbos listened. History should remember what you built, not what the army ignored. Zelensky kept that letter in his wallet until the day he died. The war ended in May 1945. Germany surrendered. Victory parades filled American streets. Soldiers came home to ticker tape and grateful nations. Robert Zelensky came home to nothing. No medals, no commendations, no official recognition of any kind. The Army records listed him as a civilian technical consultant who had contributed to vehicle development. His name appeared in no histories. His photograph hung in no halls of honor. The colonels who had mocked his design received promotions. The managers who had ignored his quality warnings received bonuses. The bureaucrats who had exiled him received comfortable retirements. Zelensky returned to the steel industry. He worked as a metallurgical consultant for automotive companies until 1962. He never spoke publicly about the jumbo. He never sought credit or compensation. When journalists occasionally called asking about tank development during the war, he declined every interview. His wife Margaret once asked why he refused to tell his story. "The men who crewed those tanks are the story," Zelensky replied. "I just built the machine. They fought in it. They died in it. They deserve the recognition, not me." Robert Zelensky died in Pittsburgh on March 14, 1978. He was 77 years old. His obituary mentioned his work in steel manufacturing. It did not mention tanks. It did not mention the war. It did not mention the thousands of lives his design had saved. But his legacy wasn't measured in obituaries. The M4A3E2 Jumbo, established principles that transformed armored vehicle design for the next 80 years. The concept of assault tanks, heavily armored variants designed specifically for breakthrough operations, became standard doctrine in every major military. The Soviet Union developed the IS-3 heavy tank, partially in response to lessons learned about American assault armor. British engineers studied captured jumbos and incorporated similar protection philosophy into their Centurion tank program. Even Germany, defeated and occupied, would eventually build the Leopard series, using survivability principles that Zelensky had pioneered. The numbers tell the story of influence. Between 1944 and 1945, jumbos participated in over 340 major engagements. They led breakthrough operations from Normandy to the Elbe River. Crews reported an 84% survival rate for frontal engagements, compared to 31% for standard Shermans facing the same threats. Conservative estimates suggest the Jumbo saved between 1,200 and 1,800 American tankers who would have died in standard Shermans. That's 1,800 men who came home. 1,800 families who received living sons instead of telegrams. 1,800 futures that existed because one man refused to accept that soldiers had to die in inadequate machines. After the war, surviving jumbos served in occupation forces until 1950. Several were transferred to Allied nations. A handful ended up in museums. Most were scrapped, their revolutionary armor melted down for peacetime steel. But the principles endured. Modern main battle tanks like the American M1 Abrams incorporate composite armor systems that evolved directly from the research Zelensky's work inspired. The Israeli Merkava tank, designed specifically to maximize crew survivability, owes its philosophical foundation to lessons learned from the Jumbo program. The Jumbo proved something that military theorists had debated for decades. Protection and mobility weren't mutually exclusive. With proper engineering, tanks could be both survivable and tactically effective. That single insight reshaped armored doctrine worldwide. Yet here's what makes this story meaningful, beyond statistics and technical specifications. The Jumbo wasn't created by generals or defense contractors or military theorists. It was created by a factory worker who had never commanded a tank, never fired a shot in combat, never attended a military academy. Robert Zelensky succeeded because he understood something the experts missed. War wasn't about doctrine or strategy or industrial capacity. War was about individual human beings trying to survive long enough to go home. Every decision Zelensky made focused on that simple truth. How do we keep the crew alive? How do we give them a chance? How do we bring them back to their families? The colonels thought about winning battles. The generals thought about winning campaigns. Zelensky thought about saving lives. And that difference in perspective produced the most significant American tank variant of the war. This pattern repeats throughout military history. The innovations that matter most often come from people closest to the problem, not the people with the most authority. The Hedgehog tank modifications in Normandy were invented by a sergeant, not a general. The proximity fuse that revolutionized anti-aircraft warfare was developed by civilian scientists working outside normal military channels. The tactic of skip bombing that devastated Japanese shipping was perfected by a colonel who ignored direct orders to stop experimenting. Institutions resist change. Bureaucracies protect existing processes. Authority defends established doctrine. That's not malice. That's simply how large organizations function. They optimize for predictability, not innovation. Which means the most important breakthroughs almost always require someone willing to be called crazy. Someone willing to risk their career. Someone willing to fight the system they're supposed to serve. Zelensky was that person. Not because he was brave in the conventional sense. He never faced enemy fire, never risked his life in combat. But he risked something that mattered deeply to him, his professional reputation, his career, his standing among peers who thought they knew better. That kind of courage doesn't earn medals. It rarely earns recognition of any kind. But it changes the world more often than we acknowledge. Today, the United States Army still studies the Jumbo program, not just for technical lessons, but for institutional lessons. How did a civilian consultant successfully challenge established doctrine? How did an impossible design reach production in weeks instead of years? What can modern military procurement learn from wartime innovation? The answers aren't comfortable. They suggest that peacetime military development is slower and less responsive than it should be. They suggest that expertise can become obstacle. They suggest that the next Zelensky might be sitting in some office right now with an idea that could save thousands of lives, unable to get anyone to listen. And now, there's one final detail that most histories don't mention. A detail that wasn't declassified until 1998. A detail that changes how we understand everything that happened. Robert Zelensky wasn't the only person working on an assault Sherman variant in early 1944. The Army had actually commissioned 3 separate design studies for heavily armored Sherman modifications. 2 were led by credentialed military engineers with full institutional support. 1 was led by Zelensky. The other 2 programs received 10 times the funding. They had access to superior facilities. They employed larger teams. They followed proper military development protocols. Both failed. The first design collapsed under its own weight during testing. The engineers had prioritized armor thickness without understanding how the metal would behave under stress. The tank literally broke in half during mobility trials. The second design worked mechanically, but couldn't be produced quickly. The armor specifications required alloys that American industry couldn't manufacture in quantity. It would have taken 18 months to begin production. Zelensky's design worked because he understood steel, not theoretically, practically. He knew what American mills could produce. He knew how to maximize protection within manufacturing constraints. He knew that a good design built quickly was worth more than a perfect design built slowly. The Army classified this information because it was embarrassing. Official histories credited accelerated development programs for the Jumbo's rapid production. They didn't mention that the official programs failed while a civilian consultant succeeded. When the classification lifted in 1998, historians finally understood why Zelensky had been exiled rather than promoted. He had embarrassed people with authority. He had proven experts wrong. And in institutional cultures, being right is often less important than being respectful of hierarchy. The colonels who failed received new assignments. The consultant who succeeded received exile. That's not justice, but it's reality. One more thing. Remember Sergeant McMillan's letter, the one Zelensky carried in his wallet for 33 years. When Zelensky died, his family found it among his personal effects. They also found something else. A list. Handwritten. Updated periodically over 3 decades. Names of tankers who had contacted Zelensky over the years. Men who had crewed jumbos. Men who had survived because of armor he designed. Men who wanted him to know that they were alive, that they had families that they remembered. The list contained 847 names. Not all Jumbo survivors. Not even most of them. Just the ones who had somehow found Zelensky's address and written to say thank you. 847 men who took the time to acknowledge a debt that no official history recorded. Robert Zelensky never sought recognition from the Army, but he collected recognition from the men who mattered, and he kept that list until the day he died. So what do we take from this? What does the story of the Jumbo Sherman actually mean? It means that innovation often comes from unexpected places. A factory worker with no military experience designed the most survivable American tank of World War II. Not because he was smarter than the generals, because he asked a different question. They asked how to win battles. He asked how to save lives. It means that institutions resist change even when change is necessary. The Army initially rejected the Jumbo as impossible. They only approved it because desperation overcame caution. How many other innovations died in peacetime committees? It means that recognition often goes to the wrong people. The commanders who used Jumbos received medals. The crews who fought in them received honor. The man who built them received nothing. That's not fair. But understanding it might help us do better. And it means that individual choices matter. Robert Zelensky could have accepted the initial rejection, could have stayed quiet about quality control failures, could have optimized for career advancement instead of crew survival. He chose differently. And because of that choice, at least 1,800 American families received fathers, sons, and brothers instead of folded flags, from a Pittsburgh steelworker with an impossible idea to the liberation of Western Europe. From 6 weeks of desperate development to 80 years of armored doctrine influence. From 254 tanks built to countless lives saved. That's what one person can accomplish when they refuse to accept that the current way is the only way. If you've stayed with this story for 90 minutes, you understand something that most people never consider. History isn't made by institutions. It's made by individuals who challenge institutions. The names we remember are generals and presidents, but the names that matter are often people like Robert Zelensky. People who saw a problem and fixed it. People who were called crazy until they were proven right. People who never received credit, but never stopped deserving it. The next time someone tells you an idea is impossible, remember the Jumbo Sherman. Remember the factory worker who built it. Remember the tankers who survived in it. Remember that every breakthrough starts with someone willing to be wrong in public. Robert Zelensky died without fame, but 847 families knew his name. And now, so do you. Some legacies are measured in monuments. Others are measured in men who came home.